Fear is the only thing stopping you from living the life you've always dreamed of. Fear is the one thing stopping you because fear is the opposite of the source of all power in the universe. You can call this power source, love, consciousness, or God. But all that is exists because of this power. All of creation, the physical universe as well as the vast world of spirit, was created by this loving power and has the most perfect answer to any fear you could ever come up with. Fear, by contrast, is a limiting and contracting energy. Where love expands and breaks down barriers, fear contracts and builds up those barriers. When we live in fear, we cut ourselves off from the source of all creation, all expansion, healing, and joy. And we are all living in fear in at least some aspects of our lives. Tonight, I will show you how every single limiting emotion can be boiled down to an aspect of fear, and how every one of those fears is ultimately false. Once you understand why fear is the one thing holding you back, and that fear is actually built on false beliefs, you will finally be ready to live a fearless life and begin channeling the power of the universe. So how does fear actually hold you back? What is the mechanism? If you've studied manifestation, as I have, you probably have heard the phrase, "What you fear will appear." Many teachers say that persisting in a negative belief or emotion will result in that negative thing coming into our life. But the reason that this happens is because we are cutting ourselves off from the source of power. When we live in fear or any negative emotion, we are persisting in a belief that God and the universe cannot actually help us. We are thus insisting that this bad thing happen in the future because we refuse the grace that is available to us. This is the mechanism by which we see magic and miracles, or the lack thereof, in our lives. But it's not magic. It's obvious. Just think of people that you know that insist on maintaining a particular negative emotion most of their lives. Maybe it's anger, pride, or apathy, or fear. You can see how these emotions have shaped the way that their life is. Isn't it obvious? And then think of those who maintain the positive emotions, like love, generosity, acceptance, or joy. Isn't it obvious how their life reflects their choices? Remarkably, David Hawkins delineated this perfectly with his emotional scale. Take a look. I have mentioned this before on the channel, how every single spiritual teaching seeks to move us from the lower contractive emotions of the scale to the higher expansive emotions of the scale. Amazingly, Hawkins described courage as the threshold between the higher and lower emotions. Courage is deciding to act despite your fear. Courage and fear are intertwined. Some would even call courage the opposite of fear. So you can see how fear is deeply embedded in the truth of this scale. Further, every single lower emotion can be described in terms of fear. Shame is the fear of being fundamentally flawed. Guilt is the fear of the consequences of negative actions. Apathy is the fear that you don't matter. Grief is the fear of permanent loss. Fear itself, is the fear of your own mortality. Desire is the fear of being incomplete or not having enough. Related is boredom, which is the fear of a lack of stimulation. Anger is a fear that something will go wrong if you don't take negative action. And finally, pride is the fear of losing your position or of being forgotten. So you can see that every negative emotion is some expression of fear. And now remember that emotion is emotion, that is energy in motion. Our emotions tell us the state of our energy and where it is flowing. So if we maintain a particular emotion, we will arrive at its outcomes. Again, think of that person who is stuck in anger most of the time. What does their life look like? I want to play a clip for you guys. I just have to make an adjustment. Welcome to the live stream, everybody.
If you do not change direction, you may end up where you are heading.
Oops. Okay, I realized I was muted. Sorry, guys. Okay, let me go back. If you don't change direction, you may end up where you're heading. So again, think of the person who is stuck in a particular negative emotion, like fear or anger. And Lao Tzu says, if you don't change direction, you may end up where you're heading. I just think it's so funny the way that quote feels profound, but it's obvious. So when we live our life in these particular states, when we have these negative limiting beliefs that cause fear, and that's am I missing something? Lost audio, right? I fixed it, didn't I? Sorry, guys. We're live, you know. That's what happens when you go live. There's always something a little funny happens. Oh, I think I just got the cue. That's what that was. All right, let's go back. So anyways, love that quote. If you don't change direction, you're going to end up where you're heading. As in, if you stay in these negative emotions, if you let these negative emotions remain in your life without being addressed, without addressing the underlying false belief, and I'll show you this soon in the rest of the presentation, that you will end up where you're heading. If your energy is headed in that direction of fear or anger or anything, any negative emotion on the scale, we can go back to the scale here. Remember again, if you're on any of those emotions on the low end of the scale, that's where you're going to end up. And again, think about the people who you know who live like that, right? There's plenty of people who are stuck on a particular fear. I feel like fear is the easiest thing to look at. It's often people don't know how to deal with a fear, and so it just integrates into their life, and then you see it in their life. They have the same problem over and over. And ultimately, the lessons that we're learning is that we should never fear anything. Right? All right. Sorry about the technical issue. I think we got it fixed, right? Right. Good sound now. Welcome to the live stream, everybody. I'm here every Tuesday at 7. Hit the like and subscribe button if you haven't already. If you're enjoying this, I've got a lot of great stuff coming up with the rest of this presentation. Next, we're going to talk about how each negative emotion is actually debunked by the way that the universe works. So I'm excited to get into that. But before I do that, I want to say hi to the chat. I'm here for the live viewers. When you guys come in live, you guys give me great questions, great discussion points. That really drives everything. It helps me really deliver this presentation the way that you guys need to hear it. So please don't be shy about putting your questions or your comments about what I'm talking about. You know, if you just have a random thought, just type it in the chat, and I will read it out loud and respond to it. I promise you. All right, we got a lot of chats already. A lot of hellos to Susan, Eleanor, Timothy, Heidi, Ian, and Ryan. Awesome. We got a full crowd here. All right. We got 8 people. Amazing. Amazing. I'm excited you guys are excited about this topic. I hope I can do it justice. I have been writing for the last couple of days about it. Like I said, I'm excited. I feel like it really integrates everything that I'm excited about. You know, I'm excited about the idea of bringing magic and miracles into our life, synchronicities. You know, the people who are closest to me, you guys know that I love this stuff. And I really do believe that this is one of the keys. If you can act in your life without fear, if you can make decisions not from fear but from love and from trust in the universe, trust in God, it really solves everything. And then, of course, when you introduce the intention of service, then you've really got it figured out. You're really acting, and God and all the angels and the spirits that are rooting for you will infuse you with their power because you are acting in a selfless way to improve the universe. And that is really what God wants. If you study any of the teachings, that is what it's about. We can jump off of this already. All right, let's see what we've got. Eleanor says, can we have people share negative emotions that they experience regularly and see how it translates to a specific fear? Yeah, please. I actually was doing that to prepare for this live stream. You know, all of these negative emotions and, you know, situations in your life that create whatever negative emotion it might be, they boil down to a fear. I really think that we're not going to come up with an example of something where that's not the case. So I ask you guys to challenge me and tell me if you find that to be true as well. Cousin 2. I got a cousin. Did I miss saying hi to someone? Let's see here. Oh, is that Bobby? Is that Bobby? Welcome to the live stream. Awesome. Eleanor says, I have some, but I'm afraid to be the only one being vulnerable since I know everyone here. Yeah, I understand. I understand, Eleanor. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. It's funny that you're mentioning being afraid in the chat. What's the worst that can happen, you know? And that's part of the way of service is not being afraid often. You know, I think any negative pattern in your life comes down to a fear that's preventing you from taking positive action. And as you understand from this channel, the most positive action you can take is in service. So Eleanor, if sharing your emotions or your ideas makes you feel vulnerable, that's a fear, right? You examine that fear and get rid of it, because I guarantee you'll be fine, right? And in doing that, you will do a service to the stream and to everyone who's watching it. All right. Fear of judgment, right. And what is the fear of judgment from other people? What does that actually result in, right? If you think about it, most of the time when we are vulnerable, it's actually showing people that you are strong. So you're going to get a positive judgment from it. But other people's judgments actually doesn't ever come into your field of life. It doesn't matter to you, right? It's like, I forget what the quote is, but basically, if you be yourself, your true friends will love you for it. And the people who don't like you for being yourself, you didn't want to be friends with them to begin with. So it always works itself out. And I guarantee you other people are spending way less time thinking about you than they are thinking about themselves and other things like that. All right. So the bottom line is that if you want maximum magic, divine energy, God's love, or whatever you want to call it in your life, you want to stay as far up the emotional scale as you can, as often as you can, right? That means avoiding these negative emotions of fear, based on fear. Luckily, God designed the universe with exactly that objective in mind. And I want to show you how the correct cosmology and understanding of spiritual truths proves false every premise behind every negative emotion, which, as we've discussed, all come from fear. The spiritual truths I'm about to share with you are sometimes controversial, but I have found them to be backed by overwhelming evidence, verified by the understandings and teachings of the greatest avatars and prophets like Jesus, Lao Tzu, Krishna, and Buddha. I'm a trained scientist, a biomedical engineer, and I have approached all of these subjects with skepticism and scrutiny. Let's go through every fear and show how it is false, beginning with the biggest. The fear of death. The answer to the fear of death is that we are eternal, and we have eternal life as spirit, and we have many, many reincarnations. Now, every religion describes some version of this. There are tens of thousands of pieces of evidence for the afterlife and reincarnation, including near-death experiences, mediums, prophecies, channelings, and actual physical evidence of reincarnations, where individuals know the previous life that they had, went back to the family and discussed with them. And there are so many examples of this, and I don't want to get carried away making that point. I've made videos about this topic. But if you can suspend disbelief and understand that there is no fear of the ultimate fear, which is death, that will unlock the rest of the fears. Okay? So, you've done this thousands of times. You've had past lives. Death is like changing clothes. It's not an annihilation, right? I've heard death described by near-death experiences as taking off a poorly fitted shoe, right? It is a relief to escape the physical body. The physical world is a very challenging place when compared to the spirit world. We are made in God's image and also to be immortal, as God is. The next fear is the fear of loss, especially of loved ones. And again, the answer is that all relationships are eternal. We are all people, all sentient beings, are ultimately spirit siblings forever. We reconnect across lifetimes. And in fact, I believe that we must reconnect to ascend. That means that every wrong that you've done to any other spirit must ultimately be righted or forgiven in order to move on. So the correct understanding of the way that the universe works is that we are all immortal spirits with immortal relationships. And so when we fear or we grieve for the loss of a loved one, we actually are based on a false premise, which is that that loved one is gone. And there, again, is so much evidence, and again, I've talked about this in many of my videos, evidence of signs coming, of loved ones coming through with signs, coming through mediums, and you can even, I believe, speak to loved ones in meditation. If you enter a calm state and you call to a loved one, they will give you the answer. You will hear the answer. And it's not like they're speaking words to you. It's usually images and feelings. And you will immediately have an answer. And you can trust that answer, or you can let the false belief that they are gone and that it's your imagination prevail, and that is a fear of loss, a fear that is based in a false premise. Fear of limitation. Here's a perfect quote from Pablo Picasso. Everything you can imagine is real. In other words, anything that you can imagine is possible. Neville Goddard explained this, and I've talked about this again, that imagination is our connection to God. Anything that we can imagine does or can exist in some realm of creation. Maybe it's in the spirit world, maybe it's on another planet, maybe it's in another dimension. But I believe that given enough focus and understanding of what is right, in the way of service, you can bring whatever you imagine into the world, especially if that thing serves the world, right? And then God will help you to create it. So this idea that we might be limited is actually false. Countless studies, and again, I've shown these in the channel, they confirm that consciousness shapes reality. For example, just a simple example, the heart electromagnetic field can be detected 6 feet outside of the body and is registered as 5,000 times stronger than the electromagnetic field of the brain. This can allow people to actually end up having coherent heartbeats in the same room. That's just a very small example of how our consciousness affects each other. So the truth is, the only limitation is your willingness to trust. The next fear is the fear of the unknown. God knows everything, so you don't need to know everything. You are held by the God who knows everything. The drop in the ocean doesn't need to understand the ocean. And isn't it better this way, right? God made parts of his creation unknown to himself to allow the drama of existence to unfold. He makes it so that we can't see the whole picture, or else it would be too easy, right? So we have these various levels of challenges, and the actual evolution of the soul is a little bit beyond the scope here, but I believe that God basically creates us in his image and then allows us to live through many lives to learn his existence. And that's the most exciting way to conduct existence, is to create these unique and powerful beings that have never been created before, and then unleash them on creation and give them your help and guidance as a parent would, as God is our father, our mother, and all these things. All right, I want to check in with the chat, see if how are you guys doing on what I'm talking about. I realized that I wanted to cut to the heart of everything really quickly, but I hope I didn't lose anyone, because I'm getting deep into, as I mentioned, some very controversial topics, and maybe you're not with me, but maybe you can stick with me on the idea that fear is going to cause a lot of problems, and we'll get more into that as well later on. Oh, Renee's here too. Amazing. Everybody's saying hi. Dr. Seuss. Dr. Seuss. What is that reference? Dr. Seuss. Susan says God says he knew you before you were born. Exactly. That's a lot of this stuff is in the Bible, and my understanding of the way that it works is that we actually choose our lives before we're born, and so again, God knew us before we were born. We consulted with God when we decide to live this life, and we knew that we were going to face certain challenges, and we were going to have certain traits and skills, and the challenge was going to be, how were we going to react to the great uncertainty that is creation. Eleanor says, a lot of what you have said sounds very much influenced by Autobiography of a Yogi. Yes, I definitely think that book is very powerful. Like I said, it's in my top 3. Timothy says, be authentic. Real people will stick. The fake will drop off. That's what I was saying, yes. Eleanor says, fear of the unknown. But aren't there a good amount of religious traditions that tell us if we don't know it all and act accordingly that we will go to hell? Oh, yeah. So I was going to include a section about the fear of hell and eternal damnation. And I went into quite the rabbit hole. I think the most powerful thing I can say about that is that literally the word hell is not spoken by Jesus. Okay? He uses the word Gehenna, which was a place in Jerusalem that was cursed by the prophet Josiah, because there were child sacrifices that had taken place there. And so, I think that it might even have had a corpse pit or something gross, really bad there. And basically he was referring to something that the people who he was teaching would know about. And so he was like, better that you don't do this bad thing or end up in Gehenna, And now, you open the King James Version of the Bible, and it says the word hell. And when you go to these websites, they say, oh yes, hell is very real. There is no doubt about it. And then they quote these passages of Jesus talking about hell, but it is not clear. And especially when you read it in context, you can see that Jesus is speaking in parable. So it doesn't make sense that he would say, if you do these sins, you're going to end up in Gehenna, which is literally a physical place. He's making an analogy. He's speaking in parables, which is about what he did almost all the time. So I think it's very important, before you make the decision that you believe in hell, that you carefully study the scripture. I think you will find that it does not support the idea that hell exists. And then when you couple that with, as I've said, there are tens of thousands of pieces of evidence about how the afterlife actually exists, what it actually looks like. it is never filled with hell. The worst thing that I've heard about is that there are people who experience hours, weeks, months even, of a separation from God. And one thing I heard it described as is they were escaping a dark labyrinth that when they finally escaped it, let's say worst case months later, they realized that it was their own construction. They constructed it themselves. And so that, I believe, is the spiritual truth about hell. Hell is something that we construct for ourselves, and it is never permanent. Debate me, bro. Debate me. Renee says, that was the person who said the quote you referenced earlier. Whoa, which quote? You said Dr. Seuss? There's a lot of... in this work, I find out there's a lot of quotes misattributed. So, are you talking about the imagination quote? The internet said it was from Pablo Picasso, who I think predates Dr. Seuss. But, there was a quote attributed to Buddha that I found was actually Swami Vivekananda in 1895, right? So there's a lot of quotes out there that are misattributed. But what I've realized is it doesn't matter, okay? When you hear a quote, your intuition tells you the truth of that quote. And you can either believe it or not. You can get into the minutia of who said it. You can start injecting fear, uncertainty, doubt that we talk about in the investing world, FUD, F-U-D, fear, uncertainty, and doubt about this quote. Who said it? And was it really Buddha or was it this other guy who's pretty good too? But, it affects your feeling about it. Don't worry about that. Focus on the truth of the quote, right? Eleanor says, I agree with you on what you said about fear of the unknown, but there are many loud voices saying the opposite. Yeah, that's why I'm here trying to say what I think is true. And I, like I said, debate me, bro. I really think I am very thorough in my understanding of these topics. And as soon as I find something that contradicts here or there, like when I started reading about Jesus talking about hell, and Jesus does talk a lot about like punishment, and he even mentions eternal punishment. But I think when you take it in context, you can see that it's parable. And when you take it in the context of, again, all these new understandings that we're having, and again, I talk about we're living in an ascending age. Jesus was teaching in the dark ages, right? He taught almost at the very bottom of human consciousness. And so he had to use very strong language to get people to stop doing the terrible things they were doing. Just look at what was happening around this time, right? The utmost barbarism was happening in Jesus' time. The absolute bottom, according to this theory of human consciousness, the worst moment of the Dark Ages was 500 AD. Every civilization across the planet collapsed. There was barbarism and murder and rape and pillaging going on across the planet. All of humanity was doing it, right? And now today, that's so far away from what we could even conceive of happening. And when there are atrocities happening, which they still happen, obviously, but the overwhelming understanding is that it's wrong, right? And I think that, again, we're heading in the direction that things are going to get better. And I've talked about that on many live streams. Timothy says, going to hell, a construct of man to control. Yeah, and that's another big piece that you have to consider when you think about, does hell exist? And then you study these scriptures, and there's a few comments about negative things, punishment, and you got to do the right thing. But is it enough of an argument coming from Jesus to say, okay, hell exists and I might go there? I really don't think so. I don't think so. That's not to say there aren't very serious consequences for doing the wrong thing. I've talked about this on the channel. I think the most basic one that I can understand is if you screw up this life, you might have to go live the same life again, the same kind of life, not the exact one, but it's like not passing the grade. You have to repeat the grade. And what is a life? It's 100 years. So if you just don't accomplish what you set out to accomplish in this life, you might just have to do it again, and that's a 100-year sentence at best. At worst, I don't know how much time we spend in the spirit world trying to figure it out, trying to plan our lives. This is all There's a lot of things I don't know for sure, but I know just at a basic level that's probably the result. Eleanor says the Friends quote. What is the Friends quote? Susan says, reliving all the pain you have caused when you die could be hell for certain people. Oh, yeah. For sure, Susan. For sure, yeah. The life review, that is... thank you for mentioning that, because I didn't put that into this presentation, but it is, I think, somewhat relevant. Yeah, that's a legitimate fear, maybe, is, if you cause pain in this lifetime, in the life review, it appears almost every near-death experience has a life review component to it. It appears that you're going to re-experience all the negative impacts that you had in your life. And that does sound pretty scary, but ultimately, the idea of hell is this eternal place. The life review always comes to an end, right? Yes, I'm sure it's very painful to experience a lifetime of suffering that you might have caused, but it will come to an end. And so it's not a permanent state. And even the judgment of it, right, is reserved for yourself. You experience the feelings that people had, but the judgment as to if those were good or bad things is left open to the individual soul's discretion and judgment. All right. So the next fear that we want to debunk is the fear of unfulfilled desires. Now again, we have infinite lives and thus infinite opportunities to fulfill our desires. The cycles of the universe and of our lives guarantee that you will have an opportunity to fulfill whatever desire it is you have, either in the near future, in the next cycle of your life. Let's say you're in a particular season of life, like we have small children, and I have desire to, let's say, go back to Bora Bora, right? And I could make it happen, or I could just wait for the cycle of my life to return to the state where it makes sense to take a huge vacation like that again, right? And then also we can apply that if you understand that we are eternal beings, you will be able to come back and pursue a particular desire, any desire really, in another life. Now, when we do this, you have to realize as we ascend, we're going to start to realize, like let's say you have the desire to rape and pillage. You're going to get to the spirit world and you're going to look at that and you're going to say, oh, yeah, maybe I want to work on getting rid of that desire instead of trying to fulfill it. Now, as we know from creation and history, it is possible to have that desire and fulfill it, but you will have to experience the negative consequences of that, and then you have to decide what to do from there. I think once we reach the spirit world, we remember all of our past lives, and we are able to have this perspective. But in this lifetime, it makes sense to accept, the things that limit us, and also reach for things that we desire, even if they seem very difficult to achieve, if they can fit into your talents, and they serve the world, right? If they fit into your ikigai, which is something I talk about in the Finding Your Purpose video that I have on the channel. So, and also what you'll realize is that as you ascend, as you gain more skill and insight into God's creation, as you grow as a spirit, you will become more skilled in manifestation and fulfillment of your desires. I think there are stories, again, from, as Eleanor mentioned, the autobiography of a yogi, where the most ascended master can just snap his fingers and create whatever it is that he wants and fulfill the desire instantly. And then what happens is, when you can do that, some of these basic desires are eliminated, and you can focus more on the higher desires of, helping people, helping God, and improving creation through, creative activity and compassion and love, things like this. The next fear I want to mention is the fear of impermanence and loss of, say, like circumstances. Again, the pattern continues forever, and this moment, and the pattern continues forever through the cycles. And this moment is unique, but also will come again, right? So it's almost a paradox. Every moment is unique. This is what's amazing about God's creation, is that this can be true, where every moment is unique and will never come again. But also, since we are immortal beings, if you seek this experience again, you will experience it in a different way, but let's say the same flavor. It's the same flavor of experience. And you can see this in your own life where, maybe you have a nostalgic experience. I know this has happened to me. Like when I was just in my hometown last week for a funeral, if you guys know. And so I'm physically in the same place, physically having some of the same experiences, but it's not the same experience I had when I was 10 years old. But also, it's a new experience that's exciting in that way, right? So this is the way that the universe is. We have to have that uniqueness of each moment, or else we wouldn't appreciate the moment. It wouldn't be important to us to learn how to appreciate the moment, which I think it is. But also, we shouldn't fear the loss of any moment or circumstance, because we can recreate it. And we'll recreate it in a new, exciting way, right? If we were able to recreate it in exactly the same way, it wouldn't be much fun. But I did do a video on the Akashic Records, and I think you can go and watch the replay anytime you want when you're in the spirit world. Anything else I wanted to say about that? Yeah. Cycles. Right. All right, let's get back to the chat. See what you guys have to say about all this. Susan says, when Jesus died, he descended into hell 3 days. While there, he took the keys to hell and released all souls trapped there, which indicates there is a hell. Yeah, like I said, there are some passages, but that, that passage isn't quoted. So again, what did he say? I think he might have even used the word Hades. So it's like you have to go back to the original Greek. And I think the NSAB, the New Standard American Bible, does a really good job of maintaining the word-for-word translation. So I'm going to have to go reread that section of the Bible. And it is possible that there's something like hell that exists. Maybe the near-death experiencers, maybe these spirits aren't really accessible because they're in hell, and so we don't have information about it. But I think that ultimately there is no realm in God's creation, including the deepest part of hell. And this was something I was going to include in the presentation, so thank you, Susan. I think that no matter how awful a spirit might be, no matter how, and in Dante's Inferno, the lowest level of hell is actually ice, right? Satan is like imprisoned in ice. I think even Satan is not beyond redemption. And I think that ultimately, maybe it will take 100 trillion years or whatever cosmic time frame you can imagine. Ultimately, Satan will be redeemed, right? In the Bible, it says that every tongue will confess and every knee will bow to Jesus and to God. And I think that includes every spirit in hell, if there is such a thing, and that those spirits will be redeemed. Again, if you think that it's otherwise, debate me, bro, because I think that we cannot limit God's mercy. We cannot think in our closed mind, no, there are some people that even God cannot save or will not save. That is to limit God. And what I've found in this cosmology and this study is that whatever concept you have of the way that creation works, it is 1,000 times more loving, more beautiful, more complex, more interesting than anything you can imagine or discuss. And that's why I am so excited about this exact topic. This is why I talk about it, because there is so much to understand and to uncover. And yeah, I from my understanding, fearing hell doesn't make sense. Again, does it exist or not? I don't think so. I don't, or at least I don't think, the standard idea of hell. Like if you've ever watched the South Park movie, it has Satan is one of the characters in the South Park movie, and they have this animation at the early when they introduce him. They show they show heaven first, and it says like population, it's like 243 or something, and then they go to hell and it's like population 9 million, and the numbers just like scrolling. It's just like souls are constantly going into hell. That's the current idea of hell. I think if hell does exist, it's the opposite, right? Most people go to heaven, and maybe a very select few go to hell. And even if they go to hell, they are able to escape in whatever period of time it takes, right? Be it a few years, be it, a few eons, whatever it is, I think that they can ultimately be redeemed. That's what I think, and I'd like to continue to explore this topic and find out the truth. I want to know the truth. Eleanor says, I feel like that part about hell in 3 days, you'll have to look into that one and see what you think. Seems so much is not literal and very interpretive. Right, yeah, that's another aspect to this, Eleanor. I think most things in the Bible are, not that they're not true, but they're explained in ways that we can understand, and especially that Dark Age people could understand, right? The Bible comes from the Dark Ages. Most of it comes from, let's say, if I can remember correctly, I think the Dark Ages began in 1700 BC and ended in 1700 AD. I think that's the way that the model works. And so almost every document in the Bible was written and was edited in the Dark Ages and came to us from that perspective. So in order to teach these spiritual truths to the people who are at the lowest consciousness, God and Jesus and the prophets had to use analogies and parables and metaphors and things and stories in order to transmit as the best that they could these spiritual truths. Right. Yes. What does that face mean, Susan? I have a hard time reading emojis, so you'll have to tell me what you actually mean. All right, let's go through a few more fears. The fear of being flawed. This is the shame emotion, the fear of being flawed. We are each uniquely designed in God's image, and we are immortal, and we are given infinite time to evolve. Okay? So that's a very basic understanding that we're not flawed, okay? You might have negative experiences. You might have, ignorance of God's truth, a fear that's in your life. But these are not permanent parts of your being. They are just momentary lapses or, making the wrong turn or even making a turn that you wanted to make because it's interesting to you. There is that aspect of positive and negative in creation. In order for creation to exist, there must be the negative. There must be the opportunity for the darkness to exist. And, sometimes participating in the physical world and in life involves a certain level of negativity. But that doesn't mean that we are actually flawed. Apathy, the fear of not mattering. The Bible explains that God loves you as much as he loves Jesus. Buddha said, you can search throughout the entire universe for someone who is more deserving of your love and affection than yourself, and that person will not be found anywhere. And as we discussed, your life energy is expressed through your emotions, and it controls your destiny. So how could you imagine that you don't matter? Right? How can you imagine if you wield this incredible power to manifest your life exactly as you feel it, as you direct it by your beliefs, your choices? How could you imagine that you don't matter? Now, for anger, which is the fear of not taking negative action, here I have to turn to Lao Tzu. He says, in the pursuit of knowledge, every day something is added. In the practice of the Tao, every day something is dropped. Less and less do you need to force things until you finally arrive at non-action. When nothing is done, nothing is left undone. This is about not taking action in anger. When you use the word force, right? You think about somebody using force, it's because they're angry. And that's not to say that there's never a time to use force, but if you do it in this negative aspect, then you will manifest that negative thing in your life. How often do we regret acting in anger? Almost every time, if we're honest. God's universe and karma account for perfect justice, and we don't need to force it, right? We see injustice in the world, people want to go and stop it, go and react with anger, but often that just creates the same cycle of pain and suffering. The only way to solve an angry situation is to bring in compassion, to bring in care, to let go of our ego and ask that person, what is it that you need? Right? I think I've heard people say that. It's like, you must be having a bad day. Or, are you okay? Right? Somebody's acting very angry. And sometimes it does diffuse the situation. But if you can understand that this is the way that we're supposed to react. You think about Jesus responding to someone who got angry at him. Can you imagine somebody yells at Jesus and then he yells back at them? That's not how it works, right? And that can be applied to any of these prophets. All right. Renee says, fear of being not good enough or making mistakes has been a hard one in my life. Took a long time to be able to see and address it. Yeah. Not being good enough. The first thing I think of is the fixed mindset versus the growth mindset. I've talked about that on this channel. There's a book called Mindset, and I forget the author. Maybe somebody can put it in the chat. But it's all about the difference between a fixed mindset and a growth mindset. And the fixed mindset is the people who are, they basically think, I can't be a failure because that means I'm a failure. I can't fail because that means I'm a failure. And I think a lot of parents kind of taught this, are you getting good grades? It's because you're smart. It's not because, maybe right now you're having a hard time in life and you could get good grades under a different circumstance or things like that, right? But the growth mindset understands that all of life we are learning and growing. And if you pull this out to the correct cosmology, right, that we have infinite lives, that we learn in the spirit world and in our reincarnations, then you really understand that fixed mindset is wrong. The growth mindset is correct, right? We don't go through lives upon lives upon lives to just be the same person over and over and do the same things and never learn and never grow. That is not how the universe works. That's not how life works, right? We all know, replace me with my 20-year-old self and I wouldn't be able to do any of this, right? I mean, I'm not the same person I was 20 years ago. That applies to everyone. And so giving yourself the grace to learn and grow and to understand that that's how everyone works, that's how life is. There's no such thing as a negative judgment or not being good enough, right? We all have our talents and skills, and often we try to do the wrong thing in our life, and that's why we're not good enough. It's because we're trying to do something that we're not meant to do, that's not in our wheelhouse. Whereas if we do something that we are really good at, we all have something like this, right? All of a sudden you're way more than good enough, in whatever context it is. So that it's such a subjective thing, and it's really unfortunate that so many people do have that internalized. And again, that is, as you mentioned, Renee, these fears, and this is something I really wanted to stress. I didn't put it in my notes, but just remember that these fears are what are holding you back. Every time you think of a fear that you've had in your life, the longer you held on to it, the more limited your life was. And you just look and see that to be true. What I'm here to do is to encourage you to let go of all of your fears and all of your negative emotions and see in this framework that all of them are false, right? That's a very powerful thing. Anytime you're feeling a negative emotion, you're actually incorrect. And mentioned autobiography of a yogi, Yogananda, who wrote that book. He says in his lessons, to be unhappy at all is a great insult to spirit, right? It's an insult to God, because ultimately the reality of our life, of our existence, is so great and amazing that there's no reason to have any of these negative emotions, right? And any negative emotion we're having is about a temporary situation that we're actually just not looking at the right way. If we were able to zoom out, we would see the necessary lessons, the necessary, compassion that we should have extended, the gifts that we should have already given, and then we'd see, oh, that's why that went poorly. Next time I'm going to do better. That's what I think happens when we reach the afterlife, and hopefully in our lives today. Yes, thank you for sharing, Renee. Thank you. Yes. Eleanor, you didn't have to be the only person sharing. And you're not, so don't worry about that. Eleanor says, I feel that sometimes. How have you addressed it? Eleanor says, right, there is usually so much more going on underneath anger. The last time I get angry was because I was fearing my needs were not going to be valued or met. Yeah, exactly. Again, any negative emotion, you can figure out that it comes from a particular fear. Renee says, Eleanor, Brene Brown books and a great therapist helped me shift perspective and learn to tell better stories. Interesting. I've never heard of her. If you want to share more about Brene Brown in the chat, please go ahead. All right. I want to get to another negative emotion, guilt, or fear of negative consequences. My understanding from spiritual study is that lessons are only repeated until we do not, they're only repeated when we don't learn them. Once we learn a particular spirit lesson, we don't have to experience the lesson or the experiences, right? Let's say the curriculum over again. So in order to avoid the negative consequences of our negative actions, we must repent. The true meaning of the word repentance is not only to admit a wrongdoing, right? If we think of repentance, it's like someone in a confession booth. But that's not actual repentance. Repentance is, yes, maybe admitting what you did. It's not only to admit the wrongdoing, but to turn away from the wrongdoing and not to repeat it. And what I understand, and Jesus teaches this, is that God's grace will come for those who repent. But even if the consequence, the negative consequence, does come, you will survive, right? You're an immortal spirit, and you will be made better for it. So sometimes we have to experience a negative situation or a negative outcome because that was the only way we could learn the lesson. But that might have been necessary, and I think that that's okay. I feel like there's a lot of things in my life that were negative, but ultimately resulted in a very positive thing. I think my most popular short was a quote from Charlie Kirk in which he says, God will take even the worst thing and turn it into something positive. And that is ultimately what happens. The next emotion is pride, or the fear of losing your position. This is one of the highest of the negative emotions, pride, and it's also the most difficult to overcome. Let's just put this back on the screen so you guys can see it. Right? Pride is right there, right at the top of the negative emotions. It requires letting go of our ego and an acceptance of God's plan. If it is our time to step down or step back, we should embrace it. We probably needed a rest anyways, right? So many people are just plowing on, working, trying to get to the top of their field, be the best, be number one, and they're just breaking themselves. They're using all of their energy. They're ignoring their loved ones. They're ignoring their relationships. They're ignoring their health. Let go of pride, right? Trust God and trust the universe and trust your fellow man that you will arrive where you're supposed to arrive. I really think pride's interesting because I feel like even in the spirit world, we probably have some pride because, we're proud of what we've learned, what we've contributed to creation. And so it's a fine line between appreciation and pride. Appreciation of yourself and pride. What is the difference? I think the difference is this like negative clenching, right? This fear part of, well, I need to be, praised and shown to be good in order to really be good. Whereas we need to let go, let all other beings do what they need to do, right? Let them, and exist and appreciate the waves of life, the waves of existence. There will be times when you'll be acknowledged for your greatness, and there'll be times when you're great and nobody even sees it. And then there'll be times when people notice that you're an asshole. And then there'll be times that people don't notice that you're an asshole, right? So it all works out, and it all works out for the best. It works out in perfect creation. That's been my experience. So just imagine, right now, you are in spirit form watching yourself live this life. You chose these challenges before incarnating, and your higher self knows all of these fears are illusions. From that perspective, what would you tell your earthly self? So let's review really fast. Death, you're eternal. Loss, relationships are eternal. Limitation, everything is possible. The unknown, God knows. Are you unfulfilled? You have infinite time. Worried about being temporary? All patterns are eternal and repeat. So, name one thing left to fear. I'll wait. Good time to check in with the chat. See what you guys think. Let me go back to this one. Hey, Matthew's here. Welcome. Matthew says, longish post, Moses 139. This is my work and my glory to bring to pass the immortality and eternal life of man. This showcases God's entire work to give us eternal life. Thank you, Matthew. Matthew is also a scholar of the Bible, so he's going to hit us with some good stuff, I can tell. In my faith, that means I can be like my Father, but it does not specify how many lives or eternal rounds this will take. True. Eleanor says, wow, Matthew, I didn't know that passage. Amazing. Thank you for sharing. Yes, thank you for sharing, Matthew. Heidi says, I love that you brought up every knee shall bow and every tongue shall confess. We all get there. It may take several eternal rounds to get the lesson, but we get there eventually. Exactly. And I think that that's what that quote means. That's how profound that quote is. It might take 100 trillion eon lifetime creation periods, whatever it is, but eventually everyone will get there, including Satan, who is, the king of fear, the king of lies, right? If I, as a father, wish my children to be like me or better than me, I will give all to accomplish this. With Father being perfect, he will allow all things to happen for our betterment. Right, yes. Yeah, the idea that God is a parent is very true in my experience. God as the mother and father, and as you just said, the mother and father wants their child to become like them, greater than them even, if we can allow that possibility. And I know that Matthew's faith does allow that possibility, and I find that fascinating. A lot of people find it scary and bad. And again, this fear idea that God is not the ultimate. I think there is one concept to me of creation, that there is a fractal pattern of all of creation, such that God himself could be a fractal of an even greater God, who is a fractal of an even greater God for infinite. And again, what I've found is whatever we think limitations we can put on creation in our concept is incorrect. The correct answer is always the infinite answer, where there is no limitation. And this is a perfect example of that. Matthew says, pride is held in the knees. Hence, kneeling is the act of humility. Right. Every knee shall bow. Right. And that is, again, that is one of the only solutions to pride is, bending your knee, giving it up to God, not getting stuck in your own concept of yourself, but instead pulling it out and understanding that we are part of everything. Everyone is a part of us. God is in every other person, is all of creation, not just in us, right? We're not the main character. If you've heard of main character syndrome, people who only care about themselves. I've talked about this in a few shorts recently, and it's just not true. And Lao Tzu does a great job of describing this. When we... What is the quote? It's a fear quote. I should have put it in the presentation, but it was a little esoteric. But basically he says, when we don't see the self as self, what do we have to fear, right? When we don't see ourself as separate from creation, then we don't fear for our own personal well-being, and instead we appreciate all of creation, which is the ultimate truth. Heidi says, isn't it interesting? God says he is Alpha and Omega, and you showing the chart of enlightenment being Alpha, Omega, and Alpha. Wouldn't that mean that God has mastered both points? Yes. Yes. And here's another controversial point, and it's in the Bible. God says, I created good and evil. Right? All that is, all that exists, includes evil. It includes these negative emotions. These negative emotions they exist. They are accessible. People live them every day. They are part of God's creation. They're not off limits, which is why I'm here to tell you, don't do it. You're going to have a way better time if you focus on the positive emotions. Now, the fact that they exist in God's creation doesn't mean that that is what God is, right? But God created this and allows it to exist so that it's possible to experience the full range of all of existence. But he remains in that ultimate omega state for you to reach to him, and you have a permanent connection to him, right? Because if he didn't remain there and you didn't have a connection to him, you would never be able to ascend. That would not be good for any of us, right? But instead, because God does remain maybe in part in that perfect state, then we can reach for him, we can commune with him, and we can evolve and progress as spirits, right? Susan says, God has emotions. Yes. Remember, we are made in his image. So things that we have happen to us happen to God as well. Now, it doesn't mean that we can conceive of what it's like for God, but I think it is safe to say that God has emotions, especially because love is mentioned so many times in the Bible, and we're going to get to that shortly. Matthew says, light and shadow exist so that we may have opposition in all things. Opposition in all things allows us to make a choice one way or the other. Exactly. Yeah, I didn't even mention free will. That is, evil has to exist in order for free will to exist, and I don't think we would give up free will. So thank you, Matthew. Appreciate you. We're going to have you on the channel as well. I think we got to do an interview with Matthew because he's a scholar of these topics as well. So I want to tell you guys some more here about my journey creating this presentation. While searching for quotes on fear, the most powerful quotes actually came from contemporary masters like Swami Vivekananda and Zen Buddhist Roshi John Daido. In 1895, Vivekananda said, "The whole secret to existence is to have no fear. Never fear what will become of you. Depend on no one. Only the moment you reject all help are you freed. No one saves us but ourselves. No one can and no one may. We ourselves must walk the path." In other words, Faith alone is not enough. We must be fearless in our own power given to us by God. That quote is very challenging to me because the idea of help, right? This is the way of service. But what it's saying is if you're relying on some sort of crutch or on someone else to eliminate your fear, ultimately that is not going to get the job done. Ultimately, we each individually have to set upon the spiritual path in order to improve our lives. And this is also a teaching about the way the universe works. Again, if you're trying to rely on a master or a teacher or someone outside of yourself to save you, even God himself, if you continue to act in a certain way, but you just pray to God once in a while, it's not going to work that way. The way the universe works is that you alone must overcome your fears in order to make that progress, in order to bring that life energy, God's love into your life, and to actually have the positive things happen in your life instead of the negative things. Also, this quote will help us understand this point as well. The Zen Buddhist Roshi John Daido Lori said, "Confined in a cage, up against a wall, pressed against barriers, if you linger in thought holding back your potential, you will remain mired in fear and frozen in inaction. If, on the other hand, you advance fearlessly and without hesitation, you manifest your power as a competent adept of the way. Passing through entanglements and barriers without hindrance, the time and season of great peace is attained." What he's describing is the fearless state. You must manifest your power as a competent adept of the way. The way is beyond the petty striving of the confused materialist. The way is how we harness the infinite power of the universe for the greater good of all sentient beings. Let's see what you guys think about all that. Heidi says, yes. Eleanor says, I fear regret. Looking back and kicking myself for wasting time, not making more of this lifetime, not doing something significant, and I fear regret of making the wrong decisions for my kids. What do I do with fear of regret? Yeah, that's a tough one. I do think, regret is a tough one because like I said earlier, these moments will never come again. But I think what we find when from our understanding of the spirit world, the possibilities are endless that we can return to. And also, what would you have regret about? You would have regret about your relationships. Well, your relationships are eternal, okay? So any person that you fear disappointing or, not doing right by, when you meet in the spirit world, you're going to be like, hey, I'm going to do better, I promise. Or this is what I'm going to do better. And there are so many stories of past life regressions and things that explain dynamics in lives where in a previous life someone was someone's mother or brother, teacher or lover, and then in the next life they were the lover, teacher, mother, brother. There are so many different permutations of every single thing. So I feel like all regret can be boiled down to regret about a relationship. And first of all, you have to understand that, Buddha said to understand everything is to forgive everything. That is God's position. He understands everything. He understands every one of our challenges in our lives. And so he forgives us of everything. Now, if we have these eternal relationships with other people, they will also understand everything. They'll be able to look at the record of our life. I think it's all in the Akashic records. Every single moment and every thought and every possibility is there to review. And so, you can take them to the Akashic records and be like, hey, I'm really sorry that this happened. Can I show you why it happened? And you'll go and you'll watch the replay together and you can talk about it. So I think the idea of regret has to be framed in terms of relationships, because what else could you regret? If you regret physical experiences, experiences with sentient beings, non-spirit entities, then you can just go back. You can just go back and do it. If you wanted to play with this particular toy again, you can go back and do it if you didn't get to do it. You wanted to dance more, or you wanted to go play more tennis, or whatever it is that you love doing, like, you can go back and do it. I don't think that that's out of the question. So ultimately, I hope that explained that there's no reason to fear regret. Matthew says, fear of regret, give yourself grace. Looking back with your 60-year-old eyes, I would have done a lot different, but I would not be the man I am today if I went back and did things different. That's what I was saying earlier, Matthew. So thank you. Exactly. So many of the things that we did wrong taught us the things that allow us to do things right today. You regret things in your childhood, and I do too. I actually mentioned this. I had this lesson or this experience when I was in my hometown of nostalgia, but I realized that nostalgia, an ingredient of nostalgia is regret. And to me, it was like regret that I didn't appreciate what I had when I was little. But again, all of my experiences allowed me to go and have that experience of appreciating nostalgia and having that insight into nostalgia that it contains a seed of regret. And that was actually very healing for me to recognize that the nostalgia I was feeling in some ways was regret. And so when I recognized that regret, I was able to let it go. So Matthew says, so the question is less about regret and more about, do I like myself now? Or you could simply create a long bucket list. Yeah. Bucket list, not a bad idea. Renee says, we can't judge our past selves for what we did not know or understand at the time. Exactly. And this is one reason that judgment is incorrect. Judgment of other people. When we see other people doing things that we think are stupid or wrong, and then you look back on your own life and you did those things. It just, maybe you learned it a little earlier in your life, but that's because you had certain experiences or opportunities that maybe they didn't have, right? Everybody has a different experience in life. So again, it doesn't make sense to judge, because ultimately we judge ourselves when we judge others. That's what that biblical quote means. Judge not lest ye be judged, because you are actually judging yourself when you judge someone else. Eleanor says, at first I disagreed about it being about relationships, but on second thought, the regret is a kind of fear of missing out on enjoying certain kinds of relationships in certain kinds of ways, like getting to experience my marriage relationship through tennis, missing relationships made via artistic cooperation. Right, yes. I think everything meaningful in life comes from our relationships, and I think, it's clear to me from this study that our relationships are eternal, because we are all eternal spirits, and so we're going to have a really long time to do the thing that you want to do. That said, it doesn't mean you shouldn't do your very best in this life. I talk about that. Live every day as if it's your last chance to do this thing, because it is your last chance to do this thing. Your last chance to experience in this specific life, in this specific moment in time, in place, in creation. I wonder if regret is impossible to avoid. I think Yogananda even uses the word regret in reference to God. He says, God regrets, the pain and suffering that people have experienced from creation. So that's a really powerful question, Eleanor, and I feel like it does deserve more exploration. But ultimately, again, God can take solace in the fact that he still has a relationship with all of those spirits that had those negative experiences, and he can show them the positive outcome that he intends through his creation, through his perfect creation. That's been my experience and understanding. Eleanor says, those are just examples, but it's in that kind of direction. Yes, thank you. All right, so here's some more quotes about fear. Everything you've ever wanted is on the other side of fear. That was George Adair. The only limits in our life are those we impose on ourselves. Bob Proctor. And of course, The Bible instructs the reader over 70 times, do not fear. The Bible also mentions the word fear 336 times, but it mentions the word love 686 times. Fear 336 times, 70 of which it's saying do not fear. And then it mentions love 686 times. It's amazing because I feel like often when people think of the Bible, I know myself as well, I don't think of love. But that is the message in the Bible. It's mixed in with a lot of stuff that sometimes people don't feel is very loving. Right? We talked about eternal punishment, that Jesus talks about, and hell and things like that. But the ultimate message, the truth of the matter is that love is the thing that is mentioned almost the most, right? At least as far as the emotions go. Here are two key biblical quotes on fear. God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of love and of a sound mind. 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 7. And that should be the only verse one would ever need, but here's another one. There is no fear in love, but perfect love drives out fear, because fear has to do with punishment. The one who fears is not made perfect in love. First book of John, chapter 4, verse 18. And here's one from the Old Testament. So do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you, and I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. Isaiah chapter 41, verse 10. And Lao Tzu, of course, said, there is no greater illusion than fear. Whoever can see through all fear will always be safe. And finally, play another Lao Tzu quote for you guys.
He who defends with love will be secure. Heaven will save him and protect him with love.
That quote really taps into something I very much believe, this idea that if we are in fear, we experience that fear result in our life, that those fears really come true in the world that we are experiencing. Whereas if we focus on God's love, if we trust God, if we let go of fear and focus on love, like I said, Lao Tzu explains, he who defends with love will be secure. Heaven will save him and protect him with love. All right, back to the chat, guys. Let's see. We got a great discussion going here. Renee said, yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah. All right. So how do you stay at or above courage on the scale that we showed you? So how do we stay at or above courage? Service. It's when you ask, how can I serve instead of what can I get? Your brain chemistry changes, right? We talked about this last week. Releases oxytocin, serotonin. The vagus nerve gets activated. You cannot be in a state of service and in a state of fear simultaneously. And this is because you reconnect to God's power, because you share his intentions. And you can feel that. This is what I was talking about last week, or the last live stream. The switch, when you switch to that service mentality, you can feel God going through you. That's why I'm not afraid when I do these live streams, right? I'm energized. I'm excited. I'm not afraid of screwing up or, being exposed to all the people who are watching, whatever it might be. It's because I feel that connection to God, that I feel that difference. And it's shown through the biology. It's all interconnected. It all works together. And so this moves you instantly up the emotional scale. So, quick service examples. Social anxiety, if you're in a situation, you think, how can I serve the people in this room? Anxiety is impossible. Are you depressed? Think about who needs help, and all of a sudden your energy is enlivened and you can go and direct it to help that person. Are you angry? Maybe think or ask the question, what does this person need? Right? If you're facing someone who's angry, what does this person need? In this situation, judgment is replaced with compassion. I also made a video called the five spiritual tools. I'll show you guys the here's the thumbnail. So here are the 5 spiritual tools really quickly and how they apply here. The first one comes from a Lao Tzu quote. We'll play that for you.
If you are depressed, you are living in the past. If you are anxious, you are living in the future. If you are at peace, you are living in the present.
So that is presence. The first spiritual tool is presence. Lao Tzu said, if you're depressed, you're living in the past. If you're anxious, you're living in the future. But if you are at peace, you are living in the present. Present awareness leaves no room for fear. So when you practice present awareness, you will see your fear dissolve. The next tool was intention. And again, as I mentioned just before, if you set your intention aligned with God's intentions of love, compassion, joy, service, you will know in your heart that you are protected. And as I mentioned, I have experienced this. When I have any doubt about what I'm doing, I'm like, this is my intention, and I feel the confirmation that this is the right thing to do. The third tool was emotions, and we talked about that in this live stream. We use our emotion as guidance to show us where we are going. Also, reframing. That's basically been this whole live stream. We counter the false beliefs. Reframing is the fourth tool. We counter the false beliefs with the spiritual truth, as we've discussed. So we can reframe anything that's causing a negative emotion in this positive, correct orientation as God has designed it. And finally, the last tool, the fifth tool, is acceptance. So you can check out my acceptance diagnostic short. In 2 minutes, I explain how it works. But basically, it boils down to whatever the situation is, can you accept it? Doesn't mean you approve of it, but can you accept that it is the case? Now, unless you're 10 feet underwater, you can accept it, right? If your life is not in jeopardy, you can accept it. And our internal biology can't tell the difference between being afraid for your life and being afraid of not getting enough likes on Instagram or on YouTube. Don't forget to like and subscribe. So the idea is that you always must use your higher order thinking to accept the situation if it is not threatening your life, so that you can eliminate the fear and reach the higher outcome, the higher purpose, or the best outcome, right, of the situation. So go ahead and watch the 5 tools video for more details, but the key is that all of these tools will help you to stay above courage on the scale. All right, let me wrap everything up for you guys. Let's tie everything together. The mechanism is your emotions equal your energy in motion. Where that energy flows, manifestation follows. So if you live in fear, you will manifest those things you're afraid of. But if you live in trust, faith, love, and truth, you will manifest the best things. This could be described as magic, but it isn't magic. It's obvious when you look at people's lives and how they orient themselves and what emotions they feel habitually. Here's the cosmology. God designed the universe to have perfect answers to every fear. Worried about death? You're eternal. Are you worried about loss? Relationships are eternal. Nothing to fear exists in the actual design of reality. Finally, the practice, stay at or above courage by asking, how can I serve? This reconnects you to God's power and keeps your energy in the upper emotions. and it shows fear to be false. The bottom line is you are eternal, you are loved, you are powerful when you are connected to love, and there is nothing to fear. So here's a challenge I want to give to you guys. This week, notice when you drop below courage on the emotional scale. When you feel fear, anger, grief, apathy, ask, what direction am I heading? Right? Lao Tzu said, if you don't change direction, you will end up where you're heading. Where are you heading when you're thinking of those things? And then ask, how can I serve right now? And then watch what happens. And finally, come back and tell us. So don't forget to like and subscribe, everybody. Check out the 5 tools video if you haven't watched that one. That's my latest edited video. I'm very proud of it. The universe was designed to eliminate fear, and tonight you've seen how. So, and also don't forget to join our Discord. So I'm going to check in with chat and see what you guys have to say about all this. Okay. Well, I guess you guys might be as done as I am. We've been going for an hour and a half. It's funny, I always plan for these to only be an hour, and they always end up being an hour and a half, which I don't know, is it too long or not long enough? I think maybe it's too long. I know that when I have an interview, people are able to listen to interviews for far longer than they're able to listen to one person. I feel like the optimal length for one person live might be an hour, but I don't know. Tell me what you guys think. I'm curious to know. But it does seem like the chat has died down and we've reached the end of my presentation. I don't know if there's anything else I really want to share with you guys. Definitely hit the like and subscribe button. Join our Discord. I'll put the link in the description. And there's also a link on the channel page. We love chatting with people in the Discord. And yeah, I don't know. I feel like this was a great one. I really enjoyed this one tonight. I think it was pretty good. Susan says, courage, courageous, good words. Meant to be an hour plus. Timothy says, look outside at northern lights. Oh, I got to check that out if there's northern lights outside. That's a good reason to end the stream right now. All right. Well, I don't see any more comments, and I want to go see the northern lights. I don't want to regret missing the northern lights, right? Anyways, I'm Danny with The Way of Service. I love you guys. This has been another Tuesday night live stream. I'm live every Tuesday at 7 p.m. I'll see you next week.